The Second World War remains one of the most studied, interpreted, and mythologized events in human history. For some, it is a story of geopolitics, economics, and ideology. For others, it represents a spiritual and archetypal confrontation, a clash of forces beyond the purely material plane. Within the framework of Norse mythology, some scholars and esoteric thinkers have posited that World War II can be understood as a living manifestation of the Ragnarok cycle, the cosmic twilight in which the gods and heroes face destruction to usher in a new world. This interpretation does not aim to moralize or to simplify history into myth, but to examine the war as an archetypal event where timeless patterns, chaos, struggle, rebirth, played out on the stage of the 20th century. This video explores that hypothesis deeply, blending mythological analysis, psychological insight, and philosophical reflection. It examines how archetypes of Wotan, Odin, Thor, and Loki manifest within the war, how the conflict might be seen as an eschatological drama, and how the aftermath of the war signals the entry into Fimbulwinter, a long winter before an eventual dawn. The purpose here is not to endorse any ideology or reinterpret history factually, but to explore the metaphorical and spiritual dimensions of a cataclysm that defined an era. Carl Jung's famous essay Wotan argued that Germany in the early 20th century was overtaken by a psychic force, an archetype of the storm god, restless and hungry for action. Wotan, the wanderer, the inspirer of frenzy and war, became a living presence in the collective unconscious, manifesting through politics, mass movements, and cultural upheaval. Jung observed that his possession was not a literal one but a psychic inevitability, a buried god returning in the modern age, demanding expression through myth and action. This lens provides an interesting key to reinterpret the war, the rise of mass movements, the intensity of nationalistic fervor, and the willingness to sacrifice individual identity for collective purpose mirror the ancient tales of warriors offering themselves for a cause beyond their lives. The battlefield becomes an arena for mythological drama. Heroes swept into an inexorable tide of events, believing themselves part of something greater, whether consciously or subconsciously. In this sense, World War II may be seen as an archetypal eruption, a moment where modernity's rational structures fractured under the weight of something more primal, more ancient, and more eternal. In Norse cosmology, time is cyclical, not linear. The cosmos moves in patterns of creation, destruction, and renewal. The Great Winter, Fimbulwinter, precedes Ragnarok, plunging the world into darkness and chaos before the dawn of a renewed age. Some esoteric interpreters of the period argue that the years 1933 to 1945 can be likened to the 12 Nights of Yule, a sacred liminal period bridging the old and the new. The first half of this cycle represents an uneasy peace, a storm gathering, while the latter half unleashes the wild hunt, a furious chaos of conflict and destruction. Seen in this way, The war itself was not an isolated episode, but a necessary convulsion in a greater cosmic cycle. The archetype of Wotan, armed with the knowledge of the great cycle, sought to fill the holes of the slain, Valhalla, with heroes prepared for the ultimate twilight. This mythopoetic framework views the war not as a meaningless carnage, but as a part of a metaphysical necessity, a preparation for an age to come. The early 20th century was rich with occult revivalism, ranging from theosophy and Ariosophy in Europe to the mystical strands of Western esotericism that influenced political and cultural elites. Ideas of hidden knowledge, cyclical time, and the eternal return permeated many intellectual and cultural circles. Within this context, it becomes less surprising that archetypal forces seem to surface during World War II. Myth and magic were not fringe concepts. They were powerful psychological forces shaping the consciousness of millions. Symbols, rituals, and myths fueled both collective identity and individual action, whether in the imagery of flags and propaganda or in the invocation of destiny and fate in political rhetoric. Seen through this lens, the war becomes not just a geopolitical struggle, but an occult drama, an alchemical process of destruction and transformation. Fire and blood act as purifiers, reducing the old world to ashes so that something new, though undefined, can be born. Another way to approach the mythological framing of World War II is through the concept of the Brothers' War. In certain sagas, Ragnarok is preceded by a fratricidal struggle, brother fighting brother, kin turning against kin. This symbolism resonates when one considers that the combatants of the war share deep cultural, ethnic, and historical ties. Europeans fought Europeans in a war that, at its core, was internal. This was not a confrontation between alien civilizations, but a war of brothers. Britain, America, Germany, and their allies locked in a deadly spiral of destruction. From a mythological standpoint, this fratricidal dynamic is not random but archetypal. The death of kin is the necessary precondition for renewal. The old order of monarchies, empires, and colonial systems collapsed in the configuration, clearing the stage for a radically different world. If the years 1933 to 1945 represent the violent convulsion of Ragnarok, then the aftermath of the war marks the entry into Fimbulwinter, a long, cold age of uncertainty, waiting, and transformation. The post-war period witnessed unprecedented technological and economic growth, but also spiritual dislocation. The bipolar world of the Cold War, nuclear brinksmanship, ideological conflicts, and proxy wars can be read as the deep winter that follows a cosmic battle, a frozen landscape where old gods lie dead and new ones have yet to arise. Modern ideologies, from consumer capitalism to radical progressivism and even resurgent nationalism, can be understood as fragments of the old mythic order, struggling for coherence in the absence of a unifying myth. In this light, contemporary controversies, from geopolitical rivalries to cultural and ideological polarization, are symptoms of a deeper archetypal crisis, a longing for meaning, for the return of the sacred, for the dawn after the endless winter. Interpreting World War II as a manifestation of Ragnarok is not about literalism, but about psychological resonance. Myths function as symbolic languages, encoding truths about human nature and collective experience. By framing the war in this way, one taps into a deeper understanding of why it continues to fascinate, horrify, and inspire, even today. This approach also highlights the tension between human agency and fate. Were the events of the mid-20th century the result of rational decisions and historical contingencies? Or were they manifestations of archetypal inevitability, patterns repeating themselves across time? Such questions have no easy answers, but they illuminate the profound complexity of history, a dance between the conscious and unconscious, the material and the spiritual, the linear and the cyclical. If the present moment is indeed Fimbulwinter, then myth suggests that it is not the end, but a necessary interlude before renewal. The old order collapses, the long winter deepens, and then suddenly the sun rises again, heralding a new world. In modern terms, this could represent the eventual emergence of new collective myths capable of uniting humanity in a period of rapid transformation. Technology, global connectivity, and shared existential threats may catalyze a collective awakening, a realization of shared destiny beyond the confines of older, fragmented identities. What form this rebirth might take remains unknown, but as the myth suggests, the dawn always follows the night, and the cycle turns eternally. To interpret World War II as a form of Ragnarok is to engage in a thought experiment. Not to diminish the tangible suffering of those years, but to understand the deeper archetypal currents that shape history. By viewing the war as an eschatological drama, one can begin to appreciate the profound ways in which myth and reality intertwine, how the past informs the present, and how the cycles of chaos and renewal define the human story. As we navigate the uncertainties of the present age, the long winter of dislocation, confusion, and searching, the myths remind us that endings are also beginnings. The wheel of time turns, and in its turning lies both destruction and hope.